Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar about timber chemical origin testing, where we'll answer the question, where does your timber come from? I'm Rachel Poluan from ZSL Sustainable Business and Finance team, and I'll be moderating for today's session. But before we start, let's briefly touch on how this webinar will work logistically. So guests will have no access to their cameras and microphones, but you can submit questions to the speakers at any time using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So there will be 4 short presentations from our speakers, followed by a Q&A panel sessions where you get the chance to ask your questions. We are recording this event so it can be published on our YouTube channel and we can reach our online audiences. So if you can pop your questions in the Q&A, please be aware that this will be included in this recording. So back to what we'll explore in this webinar. So we will take a step-by-step approach on chemical origin testing for timber, from the collection in the forest down to the practical application by downstream companies. But before we go into that in detail, I'll give you a brief overview of how this topic sits within ZSL. Next slide, please. So at ZSL, we believe that drivers of biodiversity loss can be reversed through our collaboration with science as well as the private sector. Next slide, please. And alongside with working with companies, ZSL Sustainable Business and Finance team works with a wide range of stakeholders to take action through nature positive initiatives by collaborating with our conservation and science experts. And through that, we'll deliver nature positive outcomes across supply chains and financial systems. Next, please. And we do this through projects across the globe, including the timber traceability in the Congo Basin, where we will go through in this webinar. Next slide, please. But yeah, before we start with our first speaker, please take a minute to fill out a couple of quick questions by scanning the QR code. Or through the link I've posted in the chat. Give it a couple minutes. And yeah, while everyone's filling out the survey, I think we can move on to the next slide, where I will introduce our first speaker, Sam Ross. But please drop your questions before we start. Please drop your questions in the Q&A box, and then we'll filter them out during the Q&A session. So our first speaker is Sam Ross from ZSL, who has led the delivery of spot timber and pulp assessments and engagement with the companies on their ESG reporting. But now Sam works across ZSL's wider forestry programs, building capacity for origin testing tools across the Congo Basin and supporting companies in Cameroon with biodiversity monitoring and management. So Sam will talk about what problem does timber testing solve for companies and why is more reference data needed. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Rachel, and thank you to everyone that's joined us for this slightly delayed webinar. Harriet, I think the first slide. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I'll avoid repeating any introductions, but just want to use one slide really to give some background as to why ZSL as a conservation organization is involved in this work. So at ZSL, we've got a lot of experience working on issues of sustainability and legality in the tropical forestry sector. For 8 years, we assessed and engaged with the world's leading tropical forestry companies on their ESG reporting through our Spot platform that Rachel just mentioned. Through our field office in Cameroon, we're supporting the Cameroonian Ministry of Forestry implement and monitor their forest laws. We're also working with forestry companies in the Congo Basin to improve their wildlife monitoring and management practices in their concessions. And finally, sort of building on this work, we are now working on a responsible sourcing program that really aims to increase the capacity and awareness of origin testing for key African timber species. Next slide, please. So this program is effectively divided into two parts and involves several project partners. The first aim really is to expand the reference libraries that underpin chemical testing tools by collecting reference samples of commercially traded species from Cameroon and Republic of Congo. World Forest ID, who are really the leaders in this field, will then use the data from the timber samples ZSL has collected to create testable reference models for our target species, which we'll go into a bit later. The sort of second component is on increasing the uptake of chemical testing by raising awareness through events and reports, as well as working directly with companies and enforcement authorities. For this, we're collaborating with Timber Development UK and ETIFOR through their Emma for EU program. And also just to say, the project's funded by the Lombard Odier Foundation and EcoSolve, which is a component of the EU Global Illicit Flows program. Next slide, please. So over the next few slides, I'll talk briefly about the role of origin testing and the work that goes into building this reference data. Before that, I'll just provide a very quick overview of how testing works. I think the average score we got on the pre-webinar knowledge check was around 4 to 5. In summary, chemical testing tools rely on the fact that trees and plants have chemical signatures that are specific to their species and location of harvest. So by collecting and analyzing georeferenced tree samples, you can create these spatial models that effectively map out these chemical growth patterns. Using these models, you can then verify the claimed harvest location of a wood product by comparing the chemical values of a tested sample against a reference database for that claimed location and seeing if there is a match or a mismatch. In other words, you can check whether the chemical values are consistent with what would be expected from a specific species from that specific region. Next slide, please. So to place chemical testing in the wider context of the global timber trade, we know that timber supply chains can be long and complex. And so verifying the true origin of a wood product isn't always straightforward. Even with a clear paper trail or digital chain of custody, there's still a risk that either the initial input was mislabeled or that there's been mixing of legitimate and illegitimate sources during the supply chain. This risk was illustrated in a recent study by World Forest ID, which looked at the stable isotope ratios of 59 Eastern European birch samples sourced by UK and US companies. And they found there was a high percentage of origin and species misdeclaration, and that included PFC and FSC certified products. So I think out of the 52 certified samples tested, 88% had incorrect claims. And this was conducted on birch samples from a relatively high-risk area, but the results still reflect the fact that certification schemes don't fully eliminate the risk of misdeclaration. Next slide, please. So chemical testing, in this sense, can play a useful role as part of a company's due diligence system as a means of verifying geolocation data and preventing fraud. It'll be great to hear Peter speak about this a little later, but broadly, companies can use these techniques to verify whether the stated origin of the wood they're sourcing is accurate or whether the testing reveals inconsistencies or inaccuracies that might need further investigation. In this sense, testing isn't designed to replace traceability systems. Instead, it's really a targeted tool that can provide an added layer of verification to these systems, and particularly for high-risk supply chains. In most cases, it's used to verify a location already provided within supplier documents rather than trying to work out exactly where a product has originated from without any prior supporting information. Additionally, these techniques can also help meet regulatory requirements like those set out by the UKTR and EUDR, and I'll go into this on the next slide. Thanks. So while neither the EUDR or UKTR mandate the use of testing, the methods can certainly help companies meet their due diligence obligations in terms of risk mitigation and risk assessment, and particularly regarding requirements for geolocation and addressing the risk of mixing. So overall, it adds a layer of confirmation to a company's broader due diligence and traceability efforts by providing scientific proof that the true origin of the product is consistent with what the supplier has claimed. Next slide, please. And the other angle on the topic of regulatory requirements is that even if companies aren't explicitly required to implement testing, it's very likely that enforcement authorities will be using it. So the UDR, at least in its current form, mentions that checks on operators may include chemical analysis. Additionally, in the case of the UK timber regulations, we know that the UK Timber Enforcement Authority, the OPSS, already uses chemical origin testing within its investigations. So over a 4-year period, 8 out of 140 checks involved scientific testing, and I expect this will likely increase based on recent discussions with them. As well as this, just last year, they announced an agreement with a commercial testing company, Oratane, to be their sole provider of timber testing services under the UKTR. And ultimately, if we know that enforcement authorities are implementing testing, then there's a good reason for companies bound by these regulations to do so as well. Next slide, please. So before I introduce the collection work we've done in the Congo Basin as part of this project, I just want to reiterate that these collections really form a small part of much wider efforts to increase the scope of reference data for key timber species around the world, not just for Africa. All chemical testing tools ultimately rely on the existence of comprehensive reference libraries to compare the tested samples against. And expanding these libraries is really key to increasing the sort of wider use of these tools. If you want to verify samples originated from Cameroon, then of course you need reference data for Cameroon, but if the sample doesn't match Cameroon, or you don't have clear information on the claimed origin, then you need reference data for the other main regions where that species grows. And collecting samples at this scale and to sort of the strict phytosanitary protocols that you need to adhere to is time consuming and can be a bit of a logistical challenge. So yeah, ZSL and other organizations are working to support World Forest ID in building this data, but there's always more work to be done. Beyond providing funding, companies have also supported by donating samples from their own forests in their supply chains, alongside finished traded products. Next slide, please. So moving on to the sort of second half of this, I'll now cover our progress in the Congo Basin so far, really as a case study to help illustrate the work that goes into building reference libraries. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned at the start, our program of work focuses on developing reference data for Cameroon and Republic of Congo, two heavily forested countries with vast areas allocated to natural forest concessions. We're collecting samples for 4 key species that World Forest ID identified as having insufficient data. These include Iroka and Sapili, which are 2 of the main export species from Cameroon and Congo, as well as Afsalia and teak, which are less commonly exported but growing in importance. I also want to highlight that ZSL has a legal entity and physical office based in Cameroon, which you can see on the slide there. And without this local presence and our existing relationships with regional stakeholders across the forestry sector, this work would have been not possible, or at least much more difficult. Next slide, please. So beyond ZSL having a Cameroonian office, there are several factors that make these 2 neighboring countries important for sampling. And I acknowledge that I'm generalizing across them here, but to start with the point about trade, while we source relatively little tropical timber in the UK in the grand scheme of things, a significant portion of that does come from Cameroon and Congo. So there's a value for UK importers in this sense, particularly considering the sort of perceived risk level of both countries. There are a number of specific risks associated with Congo Basin timber that make origin testing a potentially valuable tool. The concessions are vast and remote. Douala, the port city of Cameroon, is a major transit hub for timber, not just from Cameroon, but also from much of the Congo Basin. It's also a major hotspot for illegal timber, including from neighboring countries like the Central African Republic. And as a result, the risk of supply chain mixing and timber laundering is fairly high. And recent investigations from Traffic and similar organizations have shown that a lot of this is facilitated by corruption and document fraud. So despite recent improvements, technical problems and loopholes in the national traceability systems mean there are still these irregularities that ultimately allow records to be forged and illegal logs to be laundered. So in this context, really, developing these origin testing tools and the capacity for it isn't just useful for companies importing, it can also help Congo Basin forestry companies themselves demonstrate commitment to legal trade, differentiate themselves from sort of less sustainable actors, and ultimately ensure access to markets like the EU and the UK. And final slide, please. So as of now, we've completed sample collection in Cameroon, and we'll start collecting samples for Congo later this year. In total, we collected 165 core wood samples from 55 trees. The yellow markers that you can see highlight where we collected these samples from, and the distribution was designed to cover the full extent of Cameroon's principal production forest area. The samples have now finally been shipped to the UK for lab testing. Once analysed, the chemical data for each sample, which is tied to the exact location of the tree it was collected from, will then be incorporated into World Forest ID's global reference models. And now to detail how we collected these samples, I'll pass on to the recordings from Moses and Armstrong. Thank you very much.
To be sure samples collected in the field are accurate, we use a strict protocol, and this ensures integrity and authenticity of collected samples. Samples are collected from community forests as well as forest management units or concessions, and this is possible through the long-lasting relationship that ZSL has built with these entities for the past years. The methodology we used is from our partner, World Forest ID, and we need to ensure samples are handled, sealed, and documented using strict controls to prevent contamination and ensure full traceability from the forest to the laboratory. Before sampling, we make sure we get the necessary authorizations from the different state authorities. Most of these permissions are handled at national and regional levels. And each time we are in a particular area, we inform the authorities of what we are doing and the organization from where we are. Once the permissions are obtained, and the species to be sampled and known, we then decide where we have to do our collections. For us to build accurate spatial models, World Forest ID recommends taking samples from 3 trees of same species, spaced about 25 to 50 kilometers apart. After finishing one set of 3 trees, we then have to travel a further distance, 100 to 250 kilometers before starting the next set of sample collection. How samples were collected? First, we identify the target tree species using botanical keys or expert knowledge. Then, we need to make sure the tree is healthy and meets criteria. The next thing we do is we have to measure the circumference of the tree, which has to be minimum 35 centimeters at breast height level. That's about 120 centimeters from soil level. Then I will use an increment drill to drill into the tree and take out core samples, as well as sawdust that's coming out from the drill. We will equally get a leaf if it is possible to harvest one. And all of these samples are collected into envelopes that are barcoded with unique identifiers. We will input the species, diameter of the tree, the name of the locality where it was collected, GPS points, a photograph of the area of the tree and surroundings, and some other information. The samples are then dried. They are then put into a clean container in which is added a desiccant. This prevents contamination due to humidity. All of these help maintain a clear chain of custody from collection through to analysis, which is important both for enforcement purposes and for giving companies confidence in the data behind the testing. While these field trips are carefully planned, there are equally these challenges. As mentioned, samples are collected from forestry concessions and community forests, where access can be difficult and journeys are not always straightforward. At times, we cross into rivers without bridges, equipment breakdown, you can name the rest. All these difficulties we have to schedule our our work plan, since we have to move in and out. These experiences, however, highlight just how important cooperation at the concession level is for successful sampling. To build this, I will now hand over to my colleague Armstrong, who will explain how we work with forestry companies in Cameroon and what cooperation looks like in practice. Thank you very much.
Forestry companies actually set out to meet certain levels of compliance in terms of the law, in terms of market rules, in terms of regional regulations. And so an initiative like ours that has to do with helping companies meet this compliance in terms of traceability, in terms of legality, in terms of proving the origin of resources, could only be well embraced by these companies. And companies did actually administratively facilitated access to their concessions where we collected samples. They helped us in collecting these samples by first of all granting us this access, and secondly helping to identify trees that samples were collected from the inventories that they had done. One of these major steps in sustainable concession management would be to carry out a proper inventory that helps you to have an understanding of the availability of resources and how that's distributed in the field. So in that process, you come up with a map that tells you what species are, how the terrain is, where obstacles are, and so that could easily help you to plan roads, bridges, timber yards, vehicles and caterpillars, machines, heavy machines that work within the concession. But that entire process of mapping out all these resources gives you a lot of information. And this information in an initiative to collect sampling directs you to where the resources are. It helps you save time. The companies did actually do that kind of inventory, and so we gained a lot from the work that they had done ahead, and so facilitated access. We had greater knowledge on how species were distributed, and of course, with the maps, helped to navigate around the concessions easily. Also, the companies, for example, helped us with tree spotters that actually showed us around these concessions. For some concessions where things are really well planned in, it makes things easy for us, where the roads are built in compliance with best practices, sustainable, reduced impact logging. We get to ply in there easily. We get to easily spot stems, whereas in concessions where that minimum has not been respected, it actually makes it tedious to walk through the concessions and spot stems from where samples will be collected. This sampling work didn't actually go into assess whether a company is well managed or not. What these exercise was to collect samples that would help the building of these testing samples that will be used later as references to determine the origin of species, and so help in promoting legality, traceability, improving state revenue. And the government of Cameroon, for example, was very supportive of this exercise by providing us all the licenses. It's my opportunity to thank these companies for cooperation in this sample collection work.
Yeah, thank you, Sam, Moses, and Armstrong. Very interesting to see what happens behind the scenes during the sample collections and how companies' good inventory and maps can play a huge role in the journeys of collecting these samples. Yeah, so to catch up on time, I will jump straight into our next speaker, Cicely Podmore, who will represent World Forest ID, actually our partner organization in this project. They create the data and tools necessary to verify the claimed origins of forest commodities, including timber and other agricultural products. So yeah, Cicely will talk about how does chemical origin testing work and how can companies use it as part of their due diligence. Over to you, Cicely.
Rachel, for that introduction. I'm just going to share my screen with my slides. Rachel, could you confirm that you can see my screen, please?
Not yet. It doesn't yet show on mine. Yes, I can see it now.
Perfect, thank you very much. So I'm going to talk today about the practical application of this project and the link between these cores taken in the forest in the middle of Cameroon and our mission that you can see that on the screen of making supply chains traceable and accountable. And Sam has already done a fantastic job of explaining the why chemical testing might be a good idea in terms of regulatory compliance, in terms of internal due diligence. And thank you, Sam, as well for plugging our timber market study, which, as he said, was published in April last year and which showed that there are still real risks in paper-based traceability systems. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, but I think is worth mentioning, is that the illegal trade in timber is the third most profitable cross-border crime after counterfeiting and drug trafficking. And whilst you can imagine that an expert might be able to spot a fake handbag and a sniffer dog might be able to sort of sniff out some drugs, when you're looking at a container full of timber, it is much, much harder to visualize that risk. So how do we help? It all starts with a trader sample, and in this project, as Sam was talking about, we are collecting Iroko. So let's say that you are looking at some Iroko flooring with an origin claim of Cameroon. You might have a doubt that the Iroko flooring is actually from Cameroon, or you might simply be working to comply with a regulation. So the first thing that you would do is let us know that you are interested in testing this sample. What would then happen is you would have a look at our Data Explorer. And our Data Explorer is essentially a map of where we have species, where we have samples and which species they are. And you can filter by region, you can filter by country to see where we have those samples. And this is the quickest, the easiest way to find out whether it's worth you testing the material that you are interested in. So if we're talking again about Iroko flooring from Cameroon, you would see, yes, we have Iroko samples across West and Central Africa. It is worth sending that piece of flooring for testing. What happens next is the exact same process that Sam described for reference samples. You would send that sample off to the lab and they would measure its chemistry. And you can see that on my screen, some of the labs that we work with, some of the labs who are trained in our non-proprietary testing methodologies. And this phrase, non-proprietary, is quite a key phrase. It's really important to us that how we arrive at the conclusions that we do is transparent and out there in the world. Expanding this lab network is also really important because it means that testing is quicker and also easier. And we've actually in the past year really built this out, and you can see there on the right-hand side, BAAFS in China, which is bringing sort of analytical capacity to what is one of the world's biggest timber processing regions. So you've sent your piece of Iroko flooring off to the lab, they've measured it, And what you receive back is a spreadsheet with the chemical data of your sample. And you would then upload that into the World Forest ID evaluation platform, which is a tool we've developed over the past year. It's something we're really excited about. And once you'd uploaded that spreadsheet, you would click on the claimed country of origin. You'd click on Cameroon in this example, and you would click evaluate. And then the magic happens, and you receive back an automated evaluation report, which you can see there at the bottom of the screen. And in this report, you get detailed information about the methodologies that we use, as I say, to arrive at that conclusion. And you'd also get a map of Cameroon broken down into little pixels. If the pixels were green, then you could feel pretty confident that the chemistry of your sample, of your piece of Iroko flooring, did come from Cameroon. You can rest assured. But if you see red pixels, that means that the chemistry of your sample does not match the chemistry of the reference samples that we have. And there is a problem. It's essentially a failed test. And you would want to dig a little deeper in that circumstance. So I've got a nifty little diagram here, which just shows the end-to-end process from identifying the trader's sample that you have a concern about or that you're working to make sure it complies with the regulation, sending it off for chemical analysis to the lab, uploading that data to the World Forest ID evaluation platform, and then receiving back that origin of harvest verification report, which is then the thing that you can act upon. So I'll just leave that on the screen for a moment so you can take in the information. And this is exactly what we've been doing over the past year. In 2025, we've been working with FSC, for example, on their integrity project. We've been working with a lot of companies. Sam mentioned the timber market study that we did in April last year, and that was focused on birch, and that was birch samples donated from companies in their supply chains. Subsequently, we have been working on follow-up testing with those same companies, and more companies have got involved. And that's looked largely at oak. Oak is a particular interest area for US companies, we found. And aside from that, we also have the Alliance for Wood ID testing, which you can see there on the screen, which is a group of companies who are committed to ensuring that the international trade in wood products is responsible and legal. And that's companies like IKEA and John Lewis on the retailer side, and then companies like Columbia Forest Products, for example, on the more sort of commercial supply side. I've got the same diagram again, but this time you can see that we have the reference samples at the bottom. This is what Sam, Moses, and Armstrong have been talking about today. This is what we've been working on ZSL with on this project. And it's at the bottom because it really is the foundation of what we do, other than the non-proprietary reference protocols that I was talking about. What makes World Forest ID special is that we have this vast number of reference samples. We have that data underlying the analysis. So that means that our collectors are some of the most important people in this process. You can see there on the screen some photos from some other collections we've been doing across Central Africa. Obviously, you saw the footage in the presentation already today. And zooming out from this project with ZSL, we have just shy of 50,000 reference samples to date. And that is across timber, it's across soy, cocoa, coffee, even shrimp we've been working on. You can see a bit of a breakdown on the screen here. And once we have I suppose, sort of a critical mass of reference samples, we create origin models for those specific species. So we have origin models now for species like pine, like birch, like spruce, like akume as well. And we're constantly working to increase our collections, as Sam has touched on. and also derive as much information through clever data modeling from our existing samples as well. So I will leave it there. If anybody after this webinar has any further questions, our organizational address is info@forestid.org. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Cicely, for the look into chemical testing in more detailed. Yeah, it is great to see thousands of samples collected, what World Forest ID has built on for the past years, and it is clearly important to constantly increase the collections and continue to build the reference library. Our last speaker, we will hear about Peter Clayton from Timber Connection on his experience of timber testing in Timber Connection supply chain and how they have found it so far. Yeah, Peter has worked as the Timber Connections environmental officer for the past 22 years, and yeah, we're really keen to hear your experience on this tool. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I think Harriet's got some slides which we can put up. A little bit of background about the company. As you can see, we are importers of original shippers packs of tropical and temperate hardwoods. We have a warehouse facility in Liverpool with about 150,000 square feet of undercover storage. What you see in this image was taken a couple of years ago. It's now a lot fuller than this. This is probably a pre-pandemic image. For Timber Connection, we are an independent company. We're not part of a chain. You know, it's a family-run business. The managing director and CEO founder sits in the office with us all every day. So we have to trade really on our reputation and our knowledge of product. So sample testing was a very important tool for us to almost back up the due diligence we're already undertaking and show to our customers and, you know, also to our competition that, you know, we are a serious company and what we do matters. And for us, the timber trade matters. Next slide, please. Sorry, I've just covered that. So next one, thank you. So testing for Timber Connection. We wanted to make sure that when we're being told a story by a supplier that it stacks up. Other people have mentioned in their presentations already that access to the raw material is very, very difficult. In 2018, I was lucky enough to be in Cameroon, and as a very well-known supplier, they literally took us to our log park and said, pick a tree, any tree that you like, that you can see in the log park, and we'll go and find the log stump in the forest. We chose two completely at random, and the journey was then 8.5 hours to travel the equivalent of about 100 miles. So it gives you an idea that it is exceptionally difficult to get in to the forest to confirm what you're seeing and what you're getting. What I would say at the very outset of all this is that I believe that majority, if not all, importers of tropical timber in the UK, of solid timber products, as in hardwoods like how we bring in, are doing the right things. The companies that we trade with, we traded for a long, long period of time. And we are buying a solid timber product. And these companies are heavily invested in doing the right things. Before, FSC was kind of like the mainstay with a lot of companies in West Africa. There's only a handful of companies still to this day that are certified. So for those companies, they've been having to prove to the world they've been doing the right things for a long, long time. And for us, we managed to use species testing almost as a way of reiterating and confirming the good story that they've been telling us actually was correct. Next slide, please. So this is an example taken from 2022. Species actually here tested, it was Oroco, which is a species that's been mentioned quite a few times today. The image on the left-hand side are the known concessions of the company as is today, taken from the Open Timber Portal website. I haven't got the overlay of 2022 and 2021 from when the actual forest was there. But what we wanted to know was the Oroco that was being provided to us coming from the western side of Cameroon, where the mill was and where they said their forest concessions were. The image on the right, as you can see, as provided by AgroIS Labs at the time, confirms that with pretty much very strong certainty, the material provided has come from the western side of Cameroon. I must reiterate, we have actually done some testing last year on a different species. And I think now, because the sample database has been grown, like what Sam was talking about and what Rachel's been talking about, and Moses and everyone else was showing us the taking, we can now be a lot more accurate about where we take our pinpoints from. So we wouldn't say now, I think, can you confirm this has come from the western part of Cameroon or has this come from the southern? We could probably even go to an actual concession or even a local town to say, can you confirm this has come within a radius? So it is important that we grow the databases for referencing, because without those, the data we get isn't going to be accurate, or it could be too vague, it could be too open, and therefore you could have some misinterpretation with it. One thing I will add, this particular sample was taken from a member that now actually does work with World Forest ID for their timber sustainability. So it's great to see that someone that we approached back in 2022 has now come on board with it, and they are doing it for the right reasons. They're not an FSC certified company, but they are an exceptionally well-run company, and I think they do take sustainability exceptionally well, and they are looking to sort of like further their own company standing. Next slide, please. So the pros and cons of testing. Unfortunately, it's expensive. I think on average we're paying anywhere between £750 to £1,250 per sample. Not all species can be tested because you need a really good reference library for this. To that end, we asked for some Idigbo to be tested out of the Ivory Coast. Third-party certification is very limited in Ivory Coast, and I still believe there's no FSC certified forests to date. So we had a customer that was looking to say that the Idigbo they were buying had come from a known forest source, and the company was trying to do as much as they could to show that they had a green environmental agenda. Unfortunately, because there wasn't a reference library, we couldn't actually do the isotopic testing for this particular species. The big con, you might find out something you don't want to hear. Cicely alluded to this earlier, that some people, you can get a map come back and it will tell you that your wood has come from somewhere that you didn't want it to have come from. So, for example, we haven't had one yet to date, but we were testing quite a bit of European oak that came into the market, and there was a potential chance that it could have come from Ukraine as one of its sources of origin. Once you get that kind of information back, you then have to act on it further. That doesn't mean you can't place that product on the market. It just means that you're going to have to do some more work to do the due diligence on it. Non-specific claims can be misleading. The image that you can see on the right here is one of those. We asked someone just to confirm that a piece of Cepelia had come from Cameroon. As you can see from the image, yes, Cameroon is widely known to growing within Cameroon. So the sample that we'd sent them, yes, it could have come from Cameroon without shadow of doubt. If we had opened the question and said, could this also come from Republic of Congo, we got a similar sort of reaction to it. So when you are doing your timber testing, you have to be quite concise about where you're asking them to confirm the species has come from or the sample soil has come from. So if you did European oak, you would say, has this come from France? Has this come from Croatia? Has this come from Germany? You wouldn't just ask, is this European? Because that will then throw out lots of extra results, which will skew the validity of your test. The pros, as I've written out below, they can be used to bridge gaps in supply chains where sometimes documentation is as forthcoming. More importantly, it creates a better relationship, we feel, between the customer and the supplier. When our suppliers know that we take out testing on the product, it kind of reiterates to them that we're in this for the long term. We're not looking to buy one container or one shipment of product. We're looking to buy lots of products, lots of shipments over a period of time. So potentially it will give you a greater standing with that supplier. For us at the moment, in the UK trade, everybody probably trades with the same people, and it comes down to your reputation with that supplier against a competitor's reputation with suppliers. So if they know that you like their product and you're prepared to invest and take the time and effort to see where it's come from, it's going to give you a much better standing with that supplier. The more we, as per the bottom here, the more we test, the better the reference sample. I can't sort of like stress that part enough. It is difficult. We are buying, from Timber Connection's point of view, a solid timber product. So we don't do testing like people in the panel industry will test. We would normally test either if we have a customer with a complaint or if we want to bridge a gap in the due diligence map. So is there not the right documentation, or have we got a slight concern over something? We will then test for those reasons, not necessarily just to generate a library to say to people, this is where it's come from. Because unfortunately, we could do all that hard work and someone else can come along and take the benefit of it, because again, we're not a single supplier for a single sawmill. Next slide, please. So for us, timber testing adds to your existing due diligence system. It's not there to replace it. It's there to aid with it. It's there to help. The expense of timber testing is great, but sometimes the risk of not testing something can lead to a much bigger commercial risk reputation. We actually have an example of this where we were looking at bringing a product in from China a couple of years ago. It was a new product, and we decided to do an independent analysis on the product and have the supply chain completely vetted by an on-ground entity within China. It was reported as being an FSC certified product. When the auditors got on site, they confirmed that there was no FSC product being used, and the species testing that came back confirmed that the product they said they were supplying, it was something completely different. The cost of one container of that product was probably around about 60 to 70,000 pounds. And if we had landed that, it would have been a complete write-off financially. However, because we did the testing, we did the on-field inspection, we saved ourselves that dilemma. Yes, it cost us a couple of £1,000, but it saved us that reputational risk and potentially complete write-off. So for us, testing is important. It has a place in the for UKTR. I believe when EUDR finally gets up and running, it will probably have a greater testing there, responsibility there. It is nice to be able to affirm to people that with testing done, you can confirm what suppliers said to you. And again, it's getting better and better, the testing and the results. So we'll have a more accurate we will have a more concise source of information to go at, and we'll be able to tell people on a more regular basis that yes, we can say where your wood has come from with almost real-time chain of custody from shipment to shipment, which in our opinion potentially is a step up from what the likes of FSC and PFC currently give, which are retrospectively analysed. This will be a shipment by shipment basis. That's kind of it from us, really. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's really great to hear your experience with chemical origin testing and how it has adds value to Timber Connection supply chains. And yes, it is costly initially, but it is useful to save loads more in the future from reputational and environmental standpoint. We have covered the science, the field work, the implications for due diligence, and now it's over to you, our audience. If you have any questions, please drop it in the Q&A box, and yeah, we'll do our best to answer them. I thought I'll open with a starter question for everyone. I think it's mostly for Peter and Cicely, but Sam, Moses, and Armstrong, feel free to jump in as well. I'm just curious, what would you say is the biggest misconception companies tend to have about chemical origin testing when they first consider using it? Because I'm sure they have expectations at first and what they have to prepare, but yeah, what do you think is the biggest misconception in the first time?
Yeah, I'm happy to step in on that. So I think Peter's touched on this already, but first of all, it's awareness of how it works and the fact that it is not a replacement for existing systems. It's not reinventing the wheel, even in terms of the science. This is not new science. The stable isotope ratio analysis and the multi-element analysis are techniques that have actually been used for decades in the food industry, verifying food provenance claims. If you are drinking something that says it's champagne, has it come from the Champagne region of France? This is the kind of science that's been used for that for a long time. So whilst the science established. We're just sort of applying it in new ways, applying it to new commodities. Another misconception I would briefly mention is because we are all about transparency and being open with our methodologies and our data, and that the misconception being that company data would be at risk. We do not want to know when your tests are failing. We actively don't want that in our systems. What we are interested in is anonymized risk data, looking at where species are failing in certain countries. That's interesting to us because that can then inform future collections, that can then identify priority species, priority regions for growing our reference database. So I would say that those are the two main things.
If I can just add on to the end of that, I think the only misconception, and this is particularly focused on myself, was that when we started down this journey, that there was a reference library for everything. We generally thought that we could test everything and it'll be fine. So as I mentioned in my talk about the Idigbo, and we couldn't do it. We've even had the same example with species like Dar-ed Moranti, which is like a family of Shorea species out of Malaysia. It is very difficult to be able to then say, yes, this is the Moranti that you're buying, or this is the product that you have bought. You can tell a lot of times with the anatomical analysis that you are receiving the species you believe you're receiving. But with regards to the wider sort of range of the sort of like where it's come from an analysis, yes, we thought the databases would be there, and they're really not. So it's so important that more people do get involved with this. And we just thought we could send bits of wood in left, right, and centre to the likes of Agrias Labs, Q, people like that who have been doing this hard work, and they just be able to analyse it to us where it's all come from. I suppose we think we see it in the movies, therefore it must be that easy. But growing the database, the work that the likes of Sam are doing, with ZSL out in the forest in Cameroon and the tropics, it's vitally important, especially for us as a trade, if we want to show people that the timber industry is a sustainable industry. I always put it down to people that they like to make money, and the timber industry does make money, but we have a sustainable building product that is better than anything else on the market. It's a carbon storage. We need to use it. We don't need to lose it. We need to use it and treat it with the care and dignity it deserves. So, yeah, let's get more testing done so we can protect these forests.
And yeah, Peter, I'm glad you said that point, because that's exactly the challenge that our Data Explorer was created to address, showing exactly where we have that reference data. So if you're a company wanting to test Iroko, you can look first of all and say, okay, is the reference data there? Do we have the samples? Do we know that we can confidently make a verification analysis? And that's you're right, it's the first point.
Thank you both. Yeah, of course, it all comes back to having a good and extensive reference data. So yeah, I think we have one question specific to World Forest ID, which is how is the World Forest ID evaluation platform accessed, and how much does it cost to use? It's nice to see. Interesting.
Me again. Yes, so the evaluation platform, if you go to our website, there is a link that you can press, which will put you in touch with us, so you can get you set up on the platform. Alternatively, you could just email us info@worldforestid.org. Peter mentioned some figures in terms of lab testing of samples. That sounded significantly higher than the figures I've heard in recent times. Another one of the benefits of having all of the labs who are plugged into our non-proprietary testing methodologies is that more labs means that there's sort of more competitive pricing. So certainly we've found that prices for testing are much lower than the figure you mentioned today, more around the 300 mark.
Thank you. Very useful. We have got another question from Marika Klein. Sorry if I butchered that. What other entities, apart from companies, can provide collected samples? Perhaps Cicely or Sam?
I'll jump in again. So certification schemes we've been working with, I mentioned FSC and the Integrity Program. Also, Sam mentioned this himself, companies donating samples, not just traded samples, but samples from their own concessions. I would say those are the main other two sources, other than the reference sample collections.
Okay, actually, before I move on to our next question, if everyone could fill out the post-webinar survey whilst we continue the Q&A session, that would be great. I've popped the link in the chat. But yeah, I think I want to ask a question for Armstrong and Moses, if you guys are there. Since you guys have been going into the field, collecting samples, engaging with companies, what do you think needs to be in place for this kind of sampling work and testing to be replicated in other countries or supply chains? You mentioned that companies can prepare with having good inventory, everything mapped out, but what do you think, what other things can support the replication of this work?
Probably, Rachel, I'll go on if I'll go on if Moses isn't ready to take on. I think this experience has been a learning process for us, and it is allowed or enabled us to gain a lot of insight as to what it takes to carry on a project like this one. And we, through these lessons that we have learned, now have a greater visibility into what is required next when we decide to go out to the field. And it is clear that it's at several levels. After having understood what administrative processes we need to go through, after understanding what is required out in the field in terms of equipment, in terms of logistics to go out there, we have a greater understanding of these things. So we could say that in a nutshell, we need proper planning to get out to the field in terms of obtaining the required permits in time, having the necessary equipment in place, preparing field work with regards to the knowledge of the seasons on the ground, preparing the companies to receive us, and prepare maps for tree identification for us in the situation where we have to collect samples necessarily in concessions, but all depending on how the geolocation of collection sites would be. It may not always happen in concessions, and so we would find ourselves in situations where we are collecting out of concessions where companies do not really have any control over. So we would have to prepare in case we don't know anything around there, to liaise with the local administration around there that can find or prepare the ground for us to come and do the collection, but also get there and make negotiations with the communities around there well ahead of time in order to collect these samples. Because some communities would get suspicious at some time when they see people just come from nowhere, even if you have authorization and start walking into the forest to collect samples. There's so many questions that they would ask. which if you had in advance prepared your minds to that by contacting the local chiefs and informing them of what you're going to do and obtaining some sort of permission from them to do, you would avoid. So, in a nutshell, I think that's it. It's been a learning process for us. It's been a huge experience, and so we now know that we need to properly plan, get our partners ready, get the permits that are required, plan work with respect to seasons. So that's what I can say concerning that.
After Armstrong, I think if I can say something, there's also the issue of a good equipment for sampling. Very important because we had a series of breakdowns. To do a good job, we need good equipment.
Great, yeah. So if everything is as planned out as early as possible, good management plan from companies, good preparation from those who collecting samples first, then yeah, that should be, I think, the basic ground rules that we have to cover. But yeah, I'm also quite curious, Armstrong, if you could share a little bit on how does the government respond to this? You mentioned that they are very supportive of this work. So yeah, if you could share a little more about that, I think that's a very interesting point.
Yeah, so the governments generally in the Congo Basin would want to see their forests being managed in the long term. And so they have put in place a series of regulation that kind of obliges companies to manage the forest in such a way that it achieves long-term sustainable goals. And some of these rules are, for example, drafting and developing management plan for your concession, preparing an annual operational plan for your for the annual operational plot, conducting inventories, so when we come up with an initiative like this, which kind of supports the country's image in terms of credibility of origin in the market, the governments usually take these as something that is going to help the general national policy, forestry policy. That also supports the national traceability systems. It doesn't replace it, but supports the natural traceability system, especially in the event of international market regulations like the EUDR, like the UK TIPA regulations, like the Lacey Act, and others. So basically, they open up to this and help to provide the different permits that is required for us to collect these samples that will help build a database or a reference library that can be used to ascertain timber origin and so improve on the credibility of the country in terms of a supply base.
Thank you, Armstrong.
I mean, that's a little, yeah.
That is very useful to know. I think we are at time, and I just have one more question if everyone is still here. Sam, you have been doing a lot of awareness raising of the use of origin testing. Is there any lessons or interesting finding on interacting with enforcement or companies when you start awareness raising of this tool?
Thanks. No, I think I think there generally is an awareness. I'll keep this very brief because I'm aware we're quite a bit over time, but no, there's a general awareness of testing and its use. And I think the misconceptions have sort of already been covered by Cicely and Peter. I think one thing I want to stress is that it's not a completely impossible task to kind of start building these reference data sets. I know in presentations kind of emphasize the difficulty of doing it, but a large sort of chunk of that difficulty in our experience has just been the logistical side of things, which I think with time and sort of with the help of local partners and that kind of local knowledge, it does become more straightforward. So it's a worthwhile investment. I don't want to make it seem like it's a sort of impossible task. And I think it is ultimately that kind of final key to sort of expanding the use of these tools.
Amazing. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, everyone, our speakers, all attendees for joining. Sorry for running over a little bit, but yeah, thank you for getting involved. Keep an eye on ZSL's events pages for further updates on all upcoming events. And hope you'll have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Right.
Thank you, Ma.